All right, I think we're going to get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for a very timely topic on how early screening builds trust in the age of candidate fraud. My name is Sarah O'Donnell. I'm Vice President of Customer Success here at Employ, and I'll be your host for today's session. We are incredibly excited about this conversation because candidate fraud is reshaping how organizations think about trust, verification, and the candidate experience. And it's impacting teams right now across every single industry, every role, and every stage of the hiring funnel. So today you're going to hear directly from our panelists who are deeply embedded in the real world hiring challenges behind candidate fraud, specifically the ability to use early screening techniques to combat fraud and help you discover top candidates while providing a frictionless candidate experience. Our hope is that you walk away from this session with practical frameworks and best practices on how to implement early screening and fraud prevention in your hiring process. So, a few quick housekeeping tips before we dive in. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared automatically with all registrants after the webinar. And closed captioning is also available in your webinar toolbar should you need it. And lastly, we genuinely want to hear from you during this session. So don't be shy to drop your questions into the Q&A section at any point in time, and we'll get to as many as we can today. Okay, so what can you expect over the next hour together? We'll start with a quick audience poll because what webinar doesn't? And I'll introduce our speakers and we'll dig into the growing risks of candidate fraud and open it up to our panel who will have a discussion on early screening and fraud techniques. And finally, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. Okay, so as promised, let's kick off with our audience poll, which you should see popping up on your screen. And the question we're asking is, how confident are you that your current process catches misrepresentation or fraud? Go ahead and make your selections, and we'll give this about 30 seconds for everyone to submit their answer. All right. I always love a good poll. Really helps us level set on where things are and get a pulse on kind of where everybody is before we start the discussion. All right. Okay. I think we're going to share results. Are we sharing results?
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like just based off of the results that I can see, the majority of us are somewhat confident or neutral and not sure. So that makes up a whopping almost 70% of the group. Scary. Okay, I think we're all in the same boat, though. I think that's what that proves for us. Today, I'm really genuinely thrilled to introduce our speakers. We could not have a better combination of strategic, technical, and real world expertise for this topic. So, first up, we have our very own Katie Jenkins, Vice President of Product and all around powerhouse here at Employ. Katie is an award winning seasoned product leader with deep experience across AI, analytics, and HR tech. She plays a critical role in shaping our product vision to enrich the customer experience through intelligent, trustworthy innovation. She's a proud Purdue graduate and an incredible community leader as president of the board for the John Boner Neighborhood Centers. She's also one of my favorite people because we partner very closely on all things customer voice. So thank you, Katie. Next, we have Dr. Nathan Mondragon, the President and Chief Strategy Officer at ProvoTalent. A pioneer in technology-enabled psychometrics, he has spent 30 years building scalable solutions that help organizations not just hire, but truly understand their workforce. Nathan was previously the Chief Innovation Officer at HireVue, Chief IO Psychologist with Taleo, Senior OD Strategist at Dell Computer, and held various consulting and manager roles at Aon, SHL, and DDI. Nathan is a global thought leader that advises executives, boards, and government agencies on AI governance, fairness, and future of work implications. And last but certainly not least, we have Ritu Mahanka, CEO of Vonk. Ritu leads the company's vision to transform recruitment marketing through AI-powered HR technology and innovation in talent acquisition. With 20 plus years of leadership experience across HR tech and enterprise SaaS, including executive roles at LinkedIn, Syndio, and IBM, she is known for scaling high-growth businesses, building high-performing teams, and strengthening strategic customer partnerships. At Vonk, Ritu is deeply passionate about advancing AI-driven candidate screening to help employers build trust and deliver a strong candidate experience, making hiring smarter, faster, and more human than ever. Okay, and now that we know a little bit about our panelists, here's a brief intro to the companies behind them. So, Employee delivers people first, intelligent hiring solutions that empower companies to overcome their greatest hiring challenges. From startups to Fortune 100 organizations, Employee offers tailored solutions that support everything from foundational hiring to advanced talent acquisition strategies. Employee is the only organization to provide companies choice in their hiring technologies with three unique ATS platforms, Jazz HR, Lever, and JobVite, and AI companions that work alongside you in your hiring journey. Our intelligent hiring platform is trusted by more than 26,000 customers globally. ProTalent's mission is rooted in one simple idea. Hiring decisions should be based on evidence, not guesswork. ProTalent brings intelligent candidate credibility to the very top of the funnel by blending industrial organizational psychology with multi-agent AI to verify real capability, reduce fraud, and cut through the application noise. And this is done by verifying every candidate against clearly defined job-specific competencies. And last but not least, Vonk helps companies hire smarter and faster by making recruitment more predictable, efficient, and outcome driven. Vonk connects employers and candidates through intelligent job distribution, programmatic advertising, and AI-powered screening. Vonk supports enterprise employers, global staffing firms, and ATS partners across Europe, North America, and APAC, including Employ, Adecco, Software One, PwC, and Randstad, and is recognized as a strategic leader in the Fosway 9 grid for talent acquisition. Vonk recently launched EQO, a suite of AI agents designed to screen, assess, and accelerate hiring workflows while delivering pre-screened, scored, and ranked candidates. Okay, so now that we know who we're going to be hearing from, Katie, do you want to help me level set on today's discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. Before we talk about the solutions to combat candidate fraud, we have to level set on the scale of the problem. Candidate fraud isn't one isolated issue. It's an over 600 billion annual cost to US businesses. That number isn't just about bad hires. It includes lost productivity, the cost to rehire, compliance exposure and fines, damaged teams, and reputational risk. On average, each fraud incident costs companies about 28,000. The financial loss is only one part of the story. Teams lose 20 to 30% of their efficiency during a fraud investigation and resolution, and that's time recruiters aren't spending on actual hiring. It's pulling managers into damage control instead of what they can do to drive the business forward. It's not just an inconvenience. This is a real topic with measurable operational and financial risk. And what we're seeing is that the surface area continues to grow. What makes this even more concerning is that the risk of candidate fraud isn't growing, it's here. We know that this isn't a recruiter productivity issue. It does cause wasted time, but it's also a real cybersecurity risk that goes way further than just a bad hire. According to Gartner, by 2028, 1 in 4 candidates or applications will be fake. We're not just talking about like AI polished resumes. We're talking about fabricated identities, candidates who may be intentionally trying to gain access to sensitive company systems and ultimately access, use, or sell that data. Even among candidates that you know are real, 78% of candidates admit to misrepresenting themselves during the hiring process. This blows my mind every time I use that stat, guys. 78% of people admit to lying in the hiring process, right? That's wild. And in a world where AI can generate perfectly tailored resumes and interview answers, it's just becoming harder and harder for recruiters and hiring managers to assess true skills and qualifications versus these polished answers. It doesn't stop there. 17% of hiring managers say they have already encountered a deepfake technology during interviews. And when I tell you that a hiring manager is not prepared to deal with that, I mean it. Your interviewers should not be bearing this burden of trying to assess a deepfake. That's really not what their involvement in the hiring process is to do. So this is a huge problem that we have to really look at and solve on a broader scale.
Perfect. Well, now that we're all properly terrified, let's get into it with you and the rest of our panelists. Katie, I'm actually going to start with you to kick us off.
Yeah.
Let's answer this question. What's fundamentally changed about early stage screening in the last 2 to 3 years that's forcing teams to rethink their approach?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. So, one, we spent the last 10 years making it so easy for candidates to apply, and that created a different problem, right? We created this volume problem by just continuing to make that easier and easier for candidates to apply. And then basically that volume problem was then multiplied by the use of AI, right? There are entire platforms dedicated to just helping candidates shove applications in as many systems as possible to try to get a job. And so it's really becoming hard to determine like the wheat from the chaff. And it's become incredibly difficult for a recruiter to just get through screening, let alone make sure they're making the right hire. Like the hill they have to climb keeps getting steeper and steeper. And a resume is becoming less of a bellwether. And I hate to say that because it's such a central part of like someone's identity and who they are when they're going through the hiring process. But as much as you can tailor a resume or even create a completely fake resume from scratch, it's becoming harder and harder to look at that resume as like the true indicator of skill, just because you don't know how much it's been tailored or not, largely by AI.
Yeah. So let's build upon that. Ritu, how do skills, behavioral, or situational signals give hiring teams more confidence than a resume alone?
This is where a lot of teams are having a real aha moment, Sarah. Historically, job titles were used always for as proxies for skills. If someone was a sales manager or perhaps even a Java developer, it was assumed that they had these certain capabilities required. Matching systems just got better at matching, whether it was with those titles or keywords, not the actual skill. If you think about a CV or resume, that tells you someone has what they have done. What it doesn't tell you is what they can do now or how they'll perform in your specific environment. And what we're seeing with customers like Adecco and Software One, large global enterprise customers, is that once confidence really comes from triangulation. When you combine skills-based questions, situational prompts, and also perhaps behavioral insights, you start to see patterns very quickly. When someone explains how they'd behave in a certain, or they'd handle a certain situation, perhaps, or a real scenario, you'll hear how they think and not just the job title they had previously. And large language models are now making it possible to actually skip that proxy entirely and assess skills more directly. And that's the shift where recruiters move from guessing based on CVs and resumes to actually understanding capability. And that's what gives them the confidence in this shortlist.
Yeah. So, Nathan, how should TA teams think about choosing different screening methods based on role complexity or hiring volume?
Yeah, I mean, Ritu and Katie are right, right? I mean, the resumes are now being crafted with AI assistance by the applicant. So they're injecting, they take the resume, they take the job description and say, tweak my resume to fit this job. Therefore, the screening systems are inferring certain skills on that candidate based on the resume matched to the job description that may not be accurate. But I mean, inferred is good, but it may not be accurate. So you need to validate those skills. And the way you validate those skills is by designing, and as Ritu said, with LLMs now, you can design pre-screening assessments or job fit assessments that sit at the very top of the funnel right at the time of the resume screen or right after the resume screen. So you can validate that somebody does actually have X, Y, and Z skills for that job in a 15-minute predictive assessment, right? And then those assessments, the complexity of the job drives the complexity of the assessment that gets created. So a more complex job, more professional, seasoned, et cetera, type position is going to have a more things that need to be evaluated in those assessments or in those pre-screens. So you multiple steps, whatever it might be, but entry level, lower complex jobs, which are also very high volume jobs, can have a quicker pre-screen or a quicker skill-based assessment to them. So the assessment matches the complexity of the position at that point.
Yeah. So as we're hearing more about candidate fraud and misrepresentation, Katie, I'm curious from your point of view, where does this tend to show up in the hiring funnel most commonly?
Yeah, we tend to think of it in three main places. So one, we've already talked about screening, right? How real is what you're seeing come in with that application? And then that's where like the tooling that Ritu and Nathan are talking about, like where that really comes into play is to tackle it at that screening stage. But the other places that it continues to show up, I mean, one primarily interviews. I said earlier, like a hiring manager and an interviewer are not qualified to assess what is the deep fake and what isn't, right? And I mean, it's less than deepfakes. It's also more than deepfakes, right? In some cases, it's completely fabricated identities. But then on the lower risk side, you've got someone who's using like a screen reader and something on the side to funnel back an answer that's generated by AI. So there's all kinds of things that can go wrong in the interview process as well that like we think is also worth talking about and worth trying to solve that as well once you get over the screening hump. And then the rest of it is handled in different places based on risk, right? But that's the actual ID verification. Is this person who they say they are? And is this the person that's going to show up on day one, right? And so being able to capture that information wherever in the funnel it makes sense for the employer, right? We at Employee tend to say, hey, wait until you're like into the interview stage when the candidates are a bit more invested in you. At that point, they'll be more willing to hand over their social security number, their passport, right? Wait until the candidate has some level of engagement with you as the employer. But that ID verification is really, the last major piece of solving fraud across the funnel. And we believe that really you have to do almost all of these things together, right? It's like Swiss cheese. Dara wrote a whole blog about Swiss cheese, guys. Check it out. But we have you have holes in the Swiss cheese, right? There's going to be people that make it through your screening. There's going to be people that make it through your interviewing. And there's going to be people that somehow manage to make it through your ID verification, right? But through layering all of those things, you're reducing the risk that someone makes it all the way through your funnel and into your organization.
Nathan, why do traditional knockout or resume-based screens struggle to catch these risks?
Yeah, and it's obviously with the fraud going on and the ability for candidates to use AI as an assistance or to create a absolute deep fake, right? So the traditional knockout questions that you design based on a position requirements are easy to fake and easy to answer and become part of that Swiss cheese, the hole in the Swiss cheese, right? I think some of the ways to counter that is to start to look at building an interaction into the process. There's also technology that can identify if it's a deep fake, right? But if you don't want to go that far at this stage of the top of the funnel, then you need to go into building in some interactivity kind of thing into the end of the process so you can verify that it's the person and they have the right abilities that they're saying they have with some of those pre-screen tests. And then using, validation of those skilled assessments, if you will, versus just the inference. That's the real difference is validating versus inference.
And Katie, from your perspective, how can early screening be designed to build trust, not just filter people out?
I think if a candidate can tell that you're really trying to assess their skills, not just run them through extra loops, I think that really matters, right? The candidate experience can't get lost in all of this, right? Well, yes, we're trying to weed people out sooner, but you still need to be building a very strong relationship with the candidate even through that so that they still feel invested in your process. Like by the time they hit a human, right? Like we know that like that is still important, that the candidate feels cared for and like you're actually trying to assess their skills and make sure they're the right person. And then I think the reality is like it becomes, as the recruiter has fewer candidates to screen in an ideal world, they have fewer candidates to pick up out of that screening. They have the capability to build a stronger, better relationship just by having more focused time to do that. And that's absolutely a part of this, right? The longer they go in your process without touching a human, the stronger that first human touch point has to be. And so I think it does enable recruiters to spend time where it's most valuable.
Can I
Yeah. So speaking of, go ahead,
can I
Nathan.
answer? Yeah. So I think some of the best practices stuff that we've used as well is to when you're asking a candidate to go through a process, the way to build trust with them is to basically tell them what they're going to go through and why, right? So you're going to take an assessment on X skill, and the reason for that is this skill is important. It's a critical requirement for the job. Then offering in the ability for feedback for them so that they can get some report back if they so desire. In the EU, it's a requirement, right? I mean, Ritu knows that very well. So it's a requirement in the EU. If in the US, it's not, but they should still be offered that chance to get feedback and see how they did, et cetera. So that starts to build the trust in the process by telling them what and then giving them feedback.
Yeah, and if I may
Yeah.
add,
So
sorry, Sarah, if I may
no, go
also
ahead.
add one more point. So if you think about a lot of early screening today is very much still designed around exclusion. Nathan mentioned knockout questions, hard filters, decisions made on very thin information. So the best teams now, as we see it, are moving into screening in mindset instead of asking, can we reject this person yet? Right at the top of the funnel, they ask, what information do we really need to make a confident decision? And that's the shift when we can say that early screening can be designed to build trust right at that top of the funnel with candidates.
And reaching sort of building upon that more is like when you think about the human side of it, right? What signals tend to actually indicate authenticity versus automation or misrepresentation early on?
Yes, I don't think there's just one red flag. It's usually lots of different inconsistencies. As we see, we often see CVs look immaculate. I wish mine could. But when you ask role specific or situational questions, the depth just isn't there. Or answers sound really polished but fall apart when you really probe even
Hmm.
slightly deeper. Behavioral and situational prompts are particularly effective because they're harder to fake consistency. You're not asking for buzzwords, you're actually asking for reasoning. How do you? Why? And just an example or a customer story, one really large German global bank we work with found that simply adding structured follow-ups early on dramatically reduced late stage surprises. And not because they were trying to catch people out. That wasn't the point. That wasn't the intent. But because authentic experience tends to hold up under gentle questioning, while exaggeration doesn't. And the goal isn't really about policing candidates, it's the confidence. That confidence piece is so critical. And recruiters want to feel that they really understand who's in front of them.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
I had another conversation with another customer, and they even went as far as asking local questions about where they are locally, right?
Right.
They say they're, in Miami, right? They would call out a local coffee shop or something that they were aware of to really kind of test some of that. Sorry, Nathan, what were you going to mention?
uh, yeah. I was just going to sort of amplify on Ritu's response on really the interviewing, the interactivity in it. Following a structured process, which is what Ritu is describing, right? Is you want to yeah, the STAR method is one of the main method that most people use. You want to ask them about the situation. They should tell you the task, the action, and the result. And if they don't, then the follow-up question should prompt for those, right?
Right.
Whether it's an asynchronous video interview or a live conference call or a face-to-face interview, those follow-up questions generate a more robust answer and a more realistic answer and a more job-related answer as well. That makes it much easier and fair for everybody to be evaluated on the same criteria at that point.
Yeah, so I think this is a good kind of shift in when we think about the candidate experience, right? And you mentioned fairness. So Nathan and Rita, I'm curious from your perspective. Katie, feel free to chime in, obviously, as well. But how do fairness and bias considerations factor into those early screening design, especially when automation or AI is involved?
I'll go first, if that's okay, Nathan. For me, this is where early screening either earns trust or loses it completely with candidates. And fairness starts very much with that clarity. A candidate, as Nathan was alluding to earlier, should know when AI is involved and what it's being assessed. Recruiters also need to understand how recommendations are formed. That's absolutely critical. And humans must remain accountable for the final decision, particularly as Nathan again alluded to, in the EU, that's an absolute must have. The biggest risk often isn't automation, it's opacity. Too many systems are still black boxes. You don't really know what they're screening for or why someone was rejected. The teams who are doing well today are very deliberate about this in terms of candidate experience. They explicitly define what the AI should consider, whether it's relevant skills, whether it's experience, whether it's evidence, and just as importantly, what it should ignore. They avoid things like vague fit signals, and make auditability part of the absolute design process. And if you can't explain it, you can't defend it. And in today's environment, that's the bar. Nathan,
Yeah,
I'd love to hear your view.
no, I totally agree. You didn't leave me too much to ask me on that.
Sorry.
Spot on. But I think the human in the loop is not enforced enough, in my opinion, or reinforced enough. That has to be a part of the process and almost designed. If you're having an AI native process, right? AI is doing a lot of the work and a lot of the workflow, but there should be a human in every step along the way to verify the output or to verify the decision, essentially, to make the decision ultimately. Then, I think finally is the entire workflow and whatever the screening criteria for whether it's job fit, pre-screen, knockout, ID verification, reference check, interview, etc., should be linked with job relevant criteria. Right? I mean, there should be nothing in that workflow process that isn't linked to the absolute requirements of the job. Right. So, and you get into the Sarah, your example of detecting a real life person in the interview by asking them local questions about where they are is a novel approach to detecting the fakeness or the reality of the applicant. But it then trends on the unstandardization, right,
Mhm.
of asking somebody something you shouldn't be asking. So there is a fine line between what you actually do. Yeah. So it's with caution, right? Kind of thing to do that, but it's the right thing to do, but it's with caution because it's now you're getting into not job relevant type criteria.
I think the only thing I would add is like as operators of platforms that use AI that have to be, bias free and fair. Uh, Ultimately, the employer is responsible for choices made and what happens, but I do think it is our job to make sure that they understand the requirements as well, right? Like, I don't want for one of our smaller customers to just never have told a candidate ever about AI, right? And then suddenly they get hit with a lawsuit. So I think, too, like, we bear some responsibility as well in educating our customers who are employers to make sure that like they understand how to execute well.
And
Yeah.
and build it into the system, right, Katie? I mean, it's just some
Yeah,
of these things built right in. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Speaking of in this system, right? Ritu, what's an example of a well-designed early screening experience that you've seen firsthand?
Yes, Sarah, as we said earlier, it's really a well-designed screening experience doesn't try to exclude or reject faster. It tries to understand better. Most screening still very much relies on keyword filtering or an incomplete CV or a resume. And the best experiences I've seen is what we focused on building. Of course, a little plug there. Start by analyzing the CV against the job. Do a quick gap analysis, figure out what's missing, then ask those follow-up questions of the candidates that actually matter. Often through direct apply, easy apply, pull through structured questions directly from the ATS, the applicant tracking system. So instead of asking candidates to repeat everything, or screening them out too early. The best experiences I've seen is where you're filling in those missing information for the candidates. That's how, again, you're building trust, you're creating a great experience. And within minutes, the recruiter has a much clearer, structured view, and the candidate has a much smoother experience. And the result is better shortlist, less manual effort, and candidates actually feel they've been given a fair shot. And that's really the shift. We have a customer who talked about it, that we gave the candidate a choice to pick a human or an AI for early screening, and they chose AI screening because they were being screened in, not screened out, and that's a good system. And if we could build those systems, then we'd have so much of a better experience both for recruiters and candidates.
Anything else to add, Nathan or Katie?
Yeah, I think I'd add, I mean, and this is really kind of putting words to what Ritu just said, is the way I think about it is a screening process by the name screening starts to infer knockout, right?
Mhm.
But the reality is it should be job fit, and you should be looking at potential over experience for the most part. It's really about what somebody can do versus what they've done and necessarily done in the past or can do today, but what they can do in a month from now or 2 months from now. Many jobs that the high volume jobs that have these knockout, screen out type processes do it out of necessity because of the volume of people they have coming through. But the reality is they're screening people out on experiences that they don't necessarily need. And they can literally get on the job in 60 days and learn on the job within 60 days and be fully functioning at day 61. So, or day 31 in some of these positions. So that potential is more important than experience in our opinion. But that's that mind shift that is hard to get across to a lot of people when they're inundated with 200 resumes for one position.
Yeah, I mean, I know we all spend a lot of time in any business, right? Measuring our efforts, having the right outcomes we want, right? So, as we think about the designing of a screening experience, how can teams really measure whether their early screening is actually improving trust or quality or confidence in hiring decisions?
I want to give others
Yeah.
a pass first.
Go for it, retail.
I'll-
Well, I think time to hire still matters very much, but it doesn't tell you if you've made a good decision. What our customers really have begun to track instead is things like interview pass-through rates, fewer re-reviews of candidates by recruiters, shortlists that hiring managers can actually trust, and fewer late-stage drop-offs or surprises. At Adecco, for example, confidence went up when recruiters spent much less time second guessing shortlists created by AI screening. They weren't moving faster for the sake of it, they were moving forward with much more certainty and trust. And when recruiters say, I know why these candidates are here, that's when early screening is doing a good job. And those are the kind of metrics we should start be looking at more seriously.
Well, and the system has done nothing for the recruiter if the hiring manager doesn't trust it, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think that's a huge aspect of that too, Ritu, is that like, even if the recruiter trusts it, if the hiring manager doesn't have confidence in that shortlisting, you might as well not do it at all, right? And so I think that's key too, is like, how do you build that trust beyond the recruiter, but build it, organization wide so that you actually can save the recruiter that time.
Couldn't
Yeah,
agree more.
that confidence metric is important. You can do an A/B testing, right? It's fairly easy. It's sort of like here's five candidates that the the resume screen is providing you, and here's five candidates that the resume screen plus a 10-minute job fit evaluation specific to the skills of that job. And they're interviewing those 10 individuals, and they're going to give feedback immediately post-interview on what they thought of each person. That takes 1 day to set up and 2 days to conduct, and you have the feedback metrics on it right away. And it hands down, it's always the better fit candidates going through versus just the resume screen are the preferred candidates that are rated better by the managers post interview.
Mhm. All right. Well, That's all my questions. So I'd love to transition so we can answer some questions from the audience and get some of that participation. But before we do, I want to launch one kind of final poll just so we don't run out of time. You should see that poll now pop up on your screen. And the question we're asking is, would you like to learn more about ways to reduce fraud risk? A little context of why we're actively or asking this is we're actively exploring new capabilities. So your response really helps us guide what we focus on next around what's most important for you. All right, so you should be able to make your selection. And as you're doing that, I'm gathering some questions. Love some of the questions we're already getting that are coming in. Okay, I think one of the first ones we saw was, well, maybe simple, maybe not. But the question is, how do you define deep fake?
I have never been asked this question before. That's actually like a new one for me. But I think I would describe it as uh, you're seeing an AI generated human who's giving AI generated responses instead of the actual human that should be on camera. I think like to give that context to like our business specifically, like that's how I would define that for a hiring manager or recruiter.
Yeah, it's generally a fake person, right? It's a fake candidate.
Yeah.
This is, I think, a really good question. So, Tina would like us to cover you. So, you've covered candidate side fraud really well. How do you address post-hire fraud or behavioral risks that may surface later in the employment cycle?
Well, I guess I would imagine that's part of organizations. That's an interesting question. I don't know about fraud post-hire, but certainly behavioral is probably part of the hiring manager's role, right? Or early reviews or probation periods. I don't know. In the US, there are slightly different notice periods, but in Europe, there are long notice periods or probation periods, and that is the window when hiring managers, the teams, the peers review if the person they hired really does fit what the person was hired for. I don't know. Don't know if my other friends have other responses to that.
No, I think unless we're reading the question wrong,
Yeah,
the employee side risk that's what talent management activities are for,
right.
right? Performance reviews, management, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
I do think though there's always room for process improvement, right? And so I think as the hiring team, as the talent acquisition team in that organization, I think we have to do a postmortem and say,
Cool.
how did that happen? And how do we prevent that from happening next time, right? So if there was a question we could have asked, a situation, an interview that we could have done that would have allowed us to recognize like that this person was not real or was trying to defraud the company in some other way. I do think there's certainly always room to say we didn't catch this. How could we have caught it?
Yeah, I think if we think about this from the perspective, not a fraud perspective, but as it's somebody that was hired and they just didn't perform, right? They just for some reason they didn't turn out to be a good fit. They turned over early. They had to be let go, whatever it might be. That's that closed loop validation that should be done with all screening and assessment processes, right? You should be linking applicant information and data to success or lack of success on the job. And what does that look like? And then that fine tunes, to Katie's point, that then fine tunes the interview questions, the assessments, the screening, et cetera, to be better predictive of success on the job. That's the golden nugget is doing that what's called criterion validation, linking predictor data or the assessment data, interview data to success on the job. That might be what the question is getting at, and that should always be done, in my opinion.
I love this question. So, any compliance issues or concerns with using AI notes on a Zoom interview?
I mean, we are seeing more and more common practices around using some sort of a note taker and a request that recruiters are asking for as well, that there is a note taker during an interview. As long, and again, I'm speaking more on context of Europe, as long as you've made the candidate aware or you've asked for permission, which is how in Europe you would absolutely do that, is you'd ask for permission. Are you okay for us to record this and why? I don't see there is any compliance risk there. I don't know, Katie, Nathan,
No,
if you
I think you're right. Like, I think it's just all about disclosing to the candidate, like that there is some level of recording or note taking and how it will be used. But I mean, beyond that, I don't see any issue as long as the candidate is fully aware.
Yeah, and this question could be getting at the age-old question of, do you in an interview not just take notes, but do you take those notes digitally or electronically that are then discoverable in a
Mhm.
case later? Um, and do you give ratings in a system on that interview that are also then discoverable, right? And in this scenario, with AI doing the note taking and that sort of stuff, it's always discoverable because it's electronic, it's always in the system. I personally, professionally think that's the right way to go, provided your interview is structured and standardized. If your interview is unstructured and managers are going off the rail in their questions, then you could have an issue with discoverable data that's discriminatory, essentially, right?
Yeah, so this question sort of kind of piggybacks off of that too. How transparent should we be with candidates about their screening process?
I'd say more transparent than most organizations are today, and certainly
Yeah,
more transparent than feels comfortable at first.
I
Candidates
agree.
these days do not expect a full human process anymore. Let's be very clear about this. AI is not the surprise. The
Yeah,
surprise is when it's used without their knowledge. And at a minimum, candidates should know when AI is involved, what its role is going to be, and what it's actually assessing. For example, is it helping structure the responses, highlighting relevant skills, or making actually a recommendation? And importantly, it's really important at that point also is that a human is still making the final decision.
yeah.
And that's what it is. It's about transparency and trust. It actually increases trust the more you're transparent.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a smidge here on this question, what guardrails should TA leaders insist on when evaluating new screening technologies?
I mean,
I think,
explainability and auditability certainly are things
Yeah,
that they should always be looking for. In addition, audits and other things that the vendor can provide, and also ideally real results, right? Like I think, it's okay to be someone's beta, right? But like you want to know that they have like results that back up what they're doing and why it matters. So that you don't get into a situation where you've just added screening technology that is just yet another step in the process without adding a ton of value. I'm
Totally.
sorry, I interrupted you, Nathan. Please go ahead.
no, you answered it. You're good.
So this one piggybacks on that just a little bit. So our hiring managers just want resumes and don't trust screening tools, hypothetically, right? How do you get stakeholder buy-in?
I would go back to that A/B testing we were talking about earlier. It's a fairly easy thing to set up where here's a set of candidates that were screened with the resume only, and maybe you did it, Mr. and Mrs. Manager. And here's five candidates that were have resume, yes, maybe, but we're also screened with a 10-minute job fit kind of assessment based on the critical skills that are needed. And then they go and they do their interviews. And
Yeah,
it can be a blind test as well. It can be blindly done as well. So they don't know. They're not encouraged to rate positively the people that they screened in with a resume, right? So do it blindly and let the numbers show, let the numbers dictate.
totally.
And last question, kind of along these lines, Ritu, how long should we test a new screening tool before we know if it's actually working or not?
Long enough to see real behavior. To Katie's point, you've got to show proof. You've got to show some ROI, but not so long that you start hiding behind the word pilot for 6 months. And I'm going to be a bit provocative here. I see so many organizations running endless pilots with no clear success criteria. And that's not testing, that's avoiding a decision. You should know within 60 to 90 days by just sort of not just by looking at speed, perhaps, but by looking at the quality signals. Do recruiters trust it? Do hiring managers accept the shortlist? Are candidates completing the process or dropping out early enough? And be honest about what you're testing. A pilot shouldn't be about proving that the technology works. It should be about proving it works in your environment with your recruiters and your candidates. And at some point, you've got to decide. Tools, I always say this, tools don't fail because tech wasn't good enough. They fail because organizations never fully commit to it.
Yeah. Anything else to add, Katie or Nathan?
I don't think so.
All good.
Okay. I think those are all the questions that we had here. Um, Anything else you guys want to add or leave the audience with?
One question I saw that I think is interesting is like, what are the earliest signs of misrepresentation that you see and what do you do about it? I think when we look at the very earliest part of the screening process, um, I tend to think of someone's LinkedIn profile as like their all-purpose resume, right? Like it is the one that is not geared towards any specific company or specific job. So if you're seeing a resume that is immaculate, to Ritu's, to her earlier comment, it's completely fair to like go compare it against LinkedIn and assess the differences. Like it is very simple, and yes, it takes time. You could also have screening tools do some of this for you, but like if you're not in a place to have a screening tool yet, like that is one of the like easiest early funnel things that you can do is just do a quick check against LinkedIn and say like how much of this matches. The other thing that I think I usually note about early funnel is if you have an overwhelming amount of candidates and you're using like a quick apply or an easy apply that has the screening form built in, if you just need a little bit of breathing room for your recruiters, if you separate that pre-screening form, like can you work in the US and those types of questions, if you just put one more step in there and you send that out after the fact, you will get a bunch of drop off from like low interest candidates. And again, I know we made it so easy to apply, but there is a reality that like if you are a customer and you're really struggling with volume and you're not sure what to do, that is a first step that is easy to take. And will help get rid of a lot of like that spam problem, or some of the AI generated resumes where someone's just shoving resumes in your system to do it. So I think that's one of the other things I usually say when we kind of talk about things along this topic.
Yeah, actually, another really good question that kind of goes along this line here is what screening practices tend to hurt candidate experience the most, even when they are well intentioned?
I think I'll go back to the screen out mentality versus screening in. I always talk about this example that we saw in real life with one of our customers looking for a customer support role, and a bartender applies. Immediately, a human will look at the bartender. Why is the bartender applying to a customer support role? But if you look at AI screening that's built right and screens in rather than screens out, we'll go, okay, what does a bartender need to be a great customer support? Takes instructions well, can have interpersonal conversations, is a great communicator, can handle pressure, work in a pressured environment. Oh, well, I'm going to screen this bartender in for a customer support role, not screen out. And I think this is where the power of AI early screening could be actually beneficial and will sort of screen in so many more people who would otherwise be screened out if a human reviews their CV.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think when AI uses primarily like job titles as the matching, that's where people especially get hurt here, right? Like a career changer is not going to have an account manager title, but they could have been doing a job where they were executing on all the skills of an account manager. So I think that's really key, Ritu. And I think like screening tools that depend a lot on job titles definitely hurt the candidate experience because you're screening out career changers, people who might not have the educational background you need but have all of the relevant skills and experience. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I totally agree and mirror that the skills architecture, the skills taxonomy that defines the jobs within your company is critical, right? And I mean, some of these, to not to counter your point, Katie, but to kind of fine tune some of these job title systems that take the title and then create screening methods based on that. Actually, if they do that from a skills perspective, are spot on. If they do it from a you need this X, Y, and Z experience only, you have to have 2 years in a call
Yeah.
center to be a call center employee. That's incorrect, right? But if you do it from a skills perspective, then a title to what skills are needed and then evaluate those skills. That's the right way to go, which is more fair and more structured and standardized. It also gets to what we call some of the adjacencies, right? So yes, you may not get that job that you applied for. You had, call it 8 of the 10 skills that are needed, but there's other jobs that might be appropriate for you in the company, and you can start to match those skills to those other jobs. And then you can offer people other opportunities within your company, even though they didn't get the first job they applied for. That is something that the talent systems are starting to look at and do now that I think are critical to success in understanding fairness and people accepting the AI tools and understanding that AI tools are better at this than humans are at it.
So we're getting actually quite a few questions that are a little bit more tactical in nature, but I think it'll be interesting to get y'all's perspective on this. So with the increasing use of AI tools in interviews, how should we handle cases where we suspect a candidate may be using technology in a way that misrepresents their qualifications? Should we address it directly during the interview or manage it through a defined review process?
I would
Great.
not address it directly in the interview. That could cause you some real compliance problems if you're wrong. So I would say, like, if you think that's happening, ask the follow-up questions. Do the things that we've talked about, like star questions and all of that to get to questions that will help you validate if that person is real and has the real skills and experience. But do not address it during the interview, because if you are wrong, you will have caused yourself some real legal problems. So definitely after the fact.
Absolutely. And if I may add, also, there are so many, at least Wonk, we're doing that here, is we are building some signals or flags within our AI screening where when a full dossier makes it to a recruiter or a hiring manager, they can see where the flags are, where a candidate potentially has used AI. Again, it's not about calling out or to punish them, but just at least the recruiter has an informed view and can make an informed view of saying, okay, the CV was they used it for copy pasting, or they used it to write 3 paragraphs within a second of answering a question. Now that's a challenge that a recruiter should know about. So I think there are systems being built in where we can highlight these to the recruiter and they can look at it with a much more objective view. But certainly, to Katie's point, we absolutely do not want to call this out during the interview or the screening, but perhaps ask more probing questions, more situational judgment questions, so that, or, how would you, or the why, and then suddenly you'd see where the difference is when they're being authentic or not.
I think you might add there's gradients to this, and the gray area is what we're talking about where most people sit because they're a real candidate, but they're using AI to provide answers or to get answers, or instead of answering the test or the interview questions themselves. There's the other partly minor but growing population of deepfakes that actually exist. And in those scenarios, again, don't call it out, right? But in those scenarios, certainly flag it, tag it, and then you can look at the IP address, those sorts of things that we're putting into Provo Talent, where you can start to tag that information on the back end and build a database of it. So it can be a growing database of improper IPs, whatever it might be, that indicate who and what is a real deep fake, not just a one-off deep fake, but then replicate it down the road.
Yeah, I think we had a couple of questions related to like
Can
how,
I
what,
just really quick,
how.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to add one thing to that. Nathan reminded me when we talk about that gray area where like maybe someone is using AI in interview, right? It's very hard unless you have a policy to say what was and was not considered cheating, right? And so I think it's really important, like as an employer, kind of to look inward and say, like, what do we think is cheating and what do we think is not cheating? And I think a great like weather vane for that is like, how do you expect your employees to use AI once they are employees, right? And how
Totally.
do we translate that into like the application and the interview process so that we can clearly say, like, as an employer, this is how we feel about the use of AI in the hiring process, not only where we use it, but how the candidate is allowed to use it. And
Yeah.
having a policy like that really, really helps you to be able to handle that gray area that Nathan is talking about, where like it's not a deep fake, but it's also not in the clear, right? And so that can really, really help assist you as an employer in being able to say, okay, this person doesn't meet our standards of fairness or, ethics or whatever, right? Because we know how we believe AI should be used.
And
Totally.
Katie, this you're now you're touching on something that's a whole other webinar, right? Which is great. Think of this scenario of a candidate is preparing for, they know they have an interview coming up with somebody and they know the job and they talk to their parents about it or friends about it or roommate about it and say, interview me for this job, right? Before I actually go do the interview. And the interviewer is going to ask them the right questions and give them feedback, et cetera. So they're practicing and going through fake interviews to get ready for it. That's okay. Everybody accepts and suggests people should do that. Now they get into a live, the other candidate gets into a live interview and says, AI, tell me what answers I could give to these questions that I think I'm going to get asked for in that scenario. That should be okay as well because it's still prep and education. But then they get into the live interview and they're populating their engine with the questions as they come in, and then they start reading the answers. Is that crossing the line, right? And to Katie's point, that's where people need to start thinking about what is what is preparation, what is work ethic in a way and conscientiousness and getting prepared for something to get the job versus what is actually cheating in the process and trying to give themselves an unfair advantage. And I don't think anybody probably has an answer to that question today, but it's up to each company to figure that out for themselves.
Yeah.
Katie, Nathan, Ritu, thank you all so very much. I think this has been a really insightful and powerful discussion on candidate fraud and early screening techniques. And I hope everyone here feels more armed with combating fraud in the hiring process after participating in the discussion. So thank you all for joining us. I will give you 3 minutes back before likely your next meeting starts. As a reminder, this webinar's recording will be in your inbox by the end of the week. And thank you again, and I hope everybody has a really great Wednesday.
Thank you.